So on the agenda for today, I will start by sharing a little bit about my journey through the US education system from kindergarten all the way through to my master's degree at Harvard, my graduate school experience. Then I'll talk about some information about US education policy, past and present, and why it's important to know, especially now as you might be considering applying to college or continuing in your program. And then I'll share some insider tips for vetting universities. And then there'll be time at the end to ask me questions and to connect and mingle with one another. And so before I begin, I want to say a quick thank you to my friends and family who are here and for supporting me and for sharing my flyer all over Facebook and WhatsApp. Really, really appreciate you guys. And most importantly, I want to thank my parents because my story actually begins with them. So as you can see here, this is a picture of me in the middle and my parents on my graduation day. It was taken in May of last year when I graduated with my master's degree in education policy from Harvard University Graduate School of Education. Before going for my master's, I had already gathered some years of experience working full-time. So I had worked at a neighboring school, Tufts University in Boston, and worked there for about 4 years and climbed up the social or the career ladder there from, I started off as an assistant coordinator for like an administrative assistant role, and I got to an assistant director role for student affairs. And my job was to support students from enrollment to graduation. Then, after completing my master's, I went back to Tufts and instead of working with students, started working with professors, where I co-led faculty development programs on how to teach more equitably and intentionally in online and hybrid classrooms. Now, today, I am an instructional designer, and most of my work is working with corporations to create online trainings for staff and employees, as well as leadership to better align business objectives with like onboarding, training, and overall company and work culture in the organization. So I have quite a bit of experience in the field of education, both myself as a student, as an administrator, especially in a leadership role, as a trainer for faculty, and also as working in corporate spaces in learning and development. I don't want to spend too much time on my resume. I'm happy to answer any questions about it later in the Q&A, but back to this achievement, right? My graduating from Harvard, and part of the reason why you're here. This achievement is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who played a part in it. All my teachers, my mentors, colleagues, childhood friends, many of whom are here today, and of course, my family back at home in Kenya, and my parents here with me in the US. After all, I'm tall because I stand on the shoulders of so many, but my journey to Harvard actually started when I was much shorter. So this picture, again, is of me. It was taken in 2001. My parents and I had just arrived in the US, and a few weeks later, I would start kindergarten. So I did all of my kindergarten through 12th grade, or preschool to Form 4 in the US, and I also went to college and graduate school in the US. So I've experienced it all from a very young age. And my experience is unique because I was growing up and forming my identity while still being influenced by two very different cultures and expectations. That's because at home, I was expected to be Kenyan, My parents would speak to me in Swahili. I would drink uji and eat mokimo. And at night, we would watch NTV. And so as far as my family was concerned, we were a strictly Kenyan household. But as soon as I walked out the front door, the expectations on me looked very different, especially at school. I was expected to speak like an American, study American history and literature, and start every day pledging allegiance to the American flag. So this is the Pledge of Allegiance. Parents, maybe you've heard it during a sporting event or a presidential speaking event or engagement, or maybe even just this past weekend on Veterans Day. You might have heard it along with the national anthem. For students here who have been in any American public school, this should be very familiar because it is required by 47 out of the 50 United States in every public school to recite these words at the start of every single school day. So that's from kindergarten to 12th grade, preschool to Form 4. If you're in an American public school, this is how you start your day for 13 years. And it's a noble promise, a promise of liberty and justice for all. Keep this in mind because we will return to this point. So this should also look familiar. You'll see it almost everywhere, from the doctor's office to even using a new app on your phone or computer. For the students, you'll see this question in school many times on any applications or exams, especially standardized exams or state exams. So I'm genuinely curious to everyone in the room, how do you usually go about answering this question? So you should see a poll pop up on your screen. Your answer is anonymous. Again, I'm just curious, feel free to respond to the poll. And while you do that, I want to talk a little bit more about the next point on our agenda, which is US education policy, past and present. Namely, I want to talk about this because it's helpful to understand the history of US education policy as it pertains to this question, right? Because there are very unique challenges and barriers that face particularly Kenyan and Kenyan Americans right now applying to college or even in college or grad school. So hopefully you will leave today with some more insights and ways to strategize around those barriers. So, like I said, usually you'll see this question at the doctor's office or for a new app you download. And how you answer this question really does matter. And I'll tell you why it's relevant. At the doctor's office, your data is mostly used to conduct research on why some diseases affect some groups more than others. For your new app, your response to this question is used to serve you personalized advertisements that predict what hair products, what sports tickets, and even what food you're most likely to buy based on how you answer this question. In school, it's used for both research and policy making. So, for example, this question is used in research that might study why 1 in 4 high school dropouts are immigrants. And this question can also be used in policies that decide which public school districts receive the most COVID relief funding. This question speaks to a larger topic of race, ethnicity, the intersection of race, ethnicity, and identity in schooling in the US. And there's some important history here. You'll see here on this timeline that I've highlighted a few key dates. The first one I want to talk about is, well, our independence. In Kenya, we gained our independence in 1963. But in the US, Black Americans and immigrants did not have basic legal protections until a year later in 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in employment and public facilities receiving federal funds. Mind you, during this time, schools and businesses, especially in the southern states, still had white-only and colored-only signs. Then, in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, was, there we go. Sorry about that. So you'll see here on this timeline, 1963, Kenya gains its independence. 1964, Civil Rights Act passes. And then 1965, ESEA passes, which is the first federal government aid to public schools of its kind. So in order to be eligible for federal grants, public schools were required to have at least 10% of their students come from low-income families. So we're starting to see a theme develop here, a theme of the government, the federal government, using funding as a way to hold businesses and schools accountable to the promise of liberty and justice for all. Now let's talk about higher education, colleges and universities. That same year that ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act passed, affirmative action also was declared as an executive order. So the president, it wasn't passed as a law that goes through Congress. The president issued an executive order that essentially said that in order for federal contractors to be eligible for funding, they were required to have a non-discrimination employment policy. An example of federal contractors include public research universities. So again, this theme of the government using federal funds as a way to hold not only public schools, elementary and middle schools or primary schools, but also colleges and universities accountable to this promise. Justice for all, right? This promise that students say every single day. So now fast forward to today, it's 2023, almost 2024. Just this summer, in June of 2023, the issue of affirmative action reached the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court. The case was on whether universities, including Harvard, should consider this question on race in their admissions decisions, whether essentially they should ask this question to students who are applying at Harvard and at any other college in the United States. Until this year, most of the schools in the US had affirmative action policies that helped make sure that students from all backgrounds were being well represented. But now, because the Supreme Court decision shut down affirmative action or struck it down, it means it's harder to hold schools accountable to their values of equal opportunity, essentially because admissions data is no longer required, or at least race data is no longer required by federal law. And we've seen through history that without federal regulation, the promise of liberty and justice for all sometimes just doesn't come true. So to put everything into perspective, let's look at this timeline again, right? Slavery was abolished in 1865. And then 90 years later, or rather, oh, I'm sorry. Slavery was abolished in 1865. 100 years later, we get the Civil Rights Act. And mind you, the country was established in 1776 on this promise of liberty and justice for all. And you can see the disparity in the promise and the reality and the amount of time it's taken to even get any progress in terms of equal opportunity and civil rights in this country. So let's take a look at how Harvard's most recent enrollment data has to say about this question, or rather what Harvard's most recent data has to say about this question. Next slide. And then this will lead us into the next section where we'll talk about insider tips for vetting college and graduate programs. So here is Harvard's data of student enrollment by ethnicity in fall 2021. Let's take a look at it, right? You'll see that if you answer that question and you say that you are African American, you're represented here by this red bar in these graphs. So if you responded to that question saying you're Black African American, you're, let's say, under 10% of college and students enrolled at Harvard in 2021 identified as African American or Black. Even fewer, a smaller percentage in the graduate schools, and an even smaller percentage in the extension school. If you responded and said that you were an international student, you can see the bar is a little bit higher. There's more than 10% here, maybe around 12% international students in the undergrad. Here in the graduate and professional school, you can see the international students are, in terms of the minority students, are the most well represented, over 30%. And in the extension school, also leading in terms of minority students. I say in terms of minority students because you'll notice that one of the categories here is missing, and that's the category for students who identify as white. The reason the data appears here in this table, but not in the graphs, is because if it were to be represented in the graphs, it would greatly minimize or overshadow the other bars that you see here. So it'd be hard to even decipher the percentages. But essentially, if you look at this table, there are a lot of numbers here, but if you look at the up and down here, you see the different categories, which are from the poll question I asked. And then here across this, from left to right, you see these are the different schools. So here is the college, the undergrad, here's a graduate school of arts and sciences, here's the business school, the dental school, and so on, right? So when you take a look at these numbers, they look, maybe at least if you were to identify yourself as an international student, they look promising, right? But even this category of international is not perfect because international students is a very broad term. It could be international from anywhere in the world, not necessarily Africa, or in our case, or in the case of most people here, Kenya. So things like these are important to know. And especially if you're able, or if you identify as more than one group here, a category here, it could be helpful to have access to this data and see what the history of how the school has performed in terms of representing that category. And then you can decide how you want to identify yourself in your application or in your paperwork. And that's also important to know because, like I said, I've shown you the history of, unfortunately, inequality in the US education system. And right now, the challenges of applying to university as a Kenyan or a Kenyan American are uh, even more stark, or the challenges have grown because of this uncertainty around how an affirmative action will affect schools' admission policies. And then, of course, there's the rise of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, right? Now, what happens when half of college applications are essays and there's this technology that can write essays for you? There's a lot of uncertainty there. And so you might be wondering how I have this information, this data. You might think that maybe it's proprietary information. Maybe I have it because I'm an alumni, but the truth is everyone has access to this. You just need to know how to find it. And so I'm going to take a quick minute here to show you how I was able to find this information online. Most schools will publish this information. Let's see, in the same way that companies publish their annual reports, public universities are required by law to publish it. Private universities aren't required, but usually do, is in terms of best practice. And so in the same way you would research a company before investing, make sure you do the same with the university program that you're interested in, because your education is your biggest investment, not only financially, but in terms of your time, your energy, your well-being, and your future. So let me show you how I arrived to this page for Harvard University. So here we are on my browser. Let's say I look up Harvard University fact book. You'll see here a couple links. Let's just go with the first link. We'll arrive here. This again is a publicly open page. You don't have to log in or anything like that. Let's go down here. We can see there's data here based on enrollment, based on admissions, and based on degrees awarded. There's also data here on tuition, financial aid. And then if you're curious about the representation of the people who work at a university, the professors, the staff, the leadership, you can also take a look at that here. So let's just go for now. Let's go to the admissions page. As we know, with the affirmative action Supreme Court case, this used to be much more detailed. Now it's pretty simplified, but at the very least, you can see here that for the class of 2026, so that is the incoming class of 2022. If you subtract 4 years, undergraduate program is 4 years long, you would see the number of applicants, you would see how many admitted, you see the admission rate and the yield rate. The yield rate speaks to how many people were accepted, and then of those people accepted, how many people actually enrolled. So this, again, is a good way to, it's good information to have, and it's insider information. Most people don't know about this because they don't know what to look for. If we go to enrollment, that's where we just were. You can see data here of full-time students based on school, whether they're undergrad at the college or the different graduate and professional schools. You can also click here to see by race and ethnicity, and you can see the different schools based on how they self-identify themselves. You also see here that there are a few people who, instead of international here, they have US non-resident. Again, helpful information when you're trying to see which schools are delivering on their promise of having a diverse student body. And let's scroll back up. Oh, there's also a tab here on international enrollment, so you can see how many students at each school come from any particular country. Let's look up, for fun, let's look up Kenya. It'll let me, is it letting me? It's not letting me click. Oh, there it is, okay. Students from Kenya, this is as of October 2022. We have 15 Kenyan students in the college and the undergrad, and then we have a few here in some of the graduate schools. We need to get our numbers up. There are no Kenyans in the dental, design, divinity, or graduate school of education, my alma mater. There are no Kenyans as of the class of, or I guess as of October 15th. But we do see some in the School of Government, School of Law, Medical, and so forth. So this resource is openly available, like I said. And we can also find it for other schools. So I know a number of people here are calling in from New Jersey. So let's say Rutgers University fact book. Do they have a fact book? Okay, let's see, Rutgers University, fact book. There we go. They even have an archive, it appears. So let's look at admissions. Let's see here, again, you can take a look at this. You can even look at it by campus. Here, Rutgers has New Brunswick, Newark, Camden, anyway. And Rutgers is a public institution, so they are required by law to post this. So again, that is your insider tip. And I am, I'm hopeful that's I'm hopeful that is helpful. But getting back to the question here, of why all of this is important. And the point of all of this, right? All this information I've just given you, why is it relevant? What is the why? The why is, with affirmative action defeated and given the history of unequal opportunity in this country, despite the promise of liberty and freedom for all, it has just become much harder to get into top schools, especially if you're Kenyan or Kenyan American. And I know as parents, you want your children to succeed. And I know as children, we also want to succeed. And so I want to make sure that you have the tools and the strategies to succeed in what is otherwise a pretty uncertain time if you're planning on applying to college in the US or are already in college and are navigating some of these really drastic changes. I mean, first we had a pandemic, and now there's this landmark decision that's going to fundamentally change the landscape of enrollment and admissions in higher education. And of course, there's also the rise of AI and ChatGPT. And so I want to offer you an opportunity to get ahead of this and to connect with other people who are also mindful and are also trying to get ahead of this and prepare to exceed and to thrive in their higher education experience. So, towards writing your own success story, you've heard a little bit about my success story. Towards yours, again, get the insider tools, strategies to enhance your college or grad school application and thrive in your US university experience. So I'm offering a group coaching program that's 10 weeks, 10 sessions, and 10 students. And the benefit of this program is that your student, or if you are the student, will get very close personalized attention from me to help you figure out how to optimize your application. If you've already been accepted, if you did like an early admissions or early decision application, how to now, what next steps you should take to make sure you have all the resources you need before even stepping foot on campus, what you need to know before going into the financial aid office, and how to decode a syllabus, what questions to ask on your campus tour, all of those things, all of the things I had to learn through experience and trial and error, you don't have to. And so this program is specifically designed to cater and respond to the needs of first generation students who have a Kenyan background. Whether you're born in this country or born in Kenya, there's still a very unique experience that we have where we're trying to toe the line between two very different sets of expectations, cultures, and to effectively grow and thrive in that experience and to make the best of it towards writing your own success story. Whether it's going to Harvard or going to a different school, I'm happy to help facilitate that. And so that leads me towards the very end. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening. And so I'm happy to take any questions that you might have for me.